Time on deck is 9:02, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. This meeting is called to order. This is February 19th, 2021, meeting of the NIFA Board of Directors. Notice of the meeting was published in the Omaha World Journal and the Lincoln Journal Star on Sunday, February the 14th. A copy of the Open Meetings Act is located on the table at the entrance to the meeting room, posted against the wall in the meeting room, and also posted on the NIFA website, which is www.nifa.org/about/history-board. Sheila, please call the roll.
Goins,
Here.
Zammersla, Brenson, Achola,
Present.
Freeman,
Present.
Argenbray,
Present.
Wellman, Brettauer, Walden Newman, we do have a quorum.
Outstanding. I'd like to note that we do not have public comments on the agenda today. However, the main content of this meeting will be discussion of our QAP, and there will be many additional opportunities for public comment on this topic. We encourage the interested parties to attend one of the forums that will be available for public comment over the next few months. And now on to our consent agenda. Okay. Are there any items listed in 2A and 2B that the board member wishes to be removed from the consent agenda and discussed individually?
I move approval.
Okay,
I would second.
second. Okay, Sheila, please call the vote.
Zammersla,
Yes.
Achola,
Yes.
Freeman,
Yes.
Argenbray,
Yes.
Wellman,
Yes.
Walden Newman, Goins,
Yes.
motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to our strategic topic. And I will turn the meeting over to Shannon to introduce the board to our guest speaker.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Colton.
Morning.
This is our first time with Colton as a father in person, so we're excited to see you and hope you're well rested. This morning, we are lucky to have Meredith Dillon from the Sherwood Foundation talk to us about a couple of studies that have been, well, a large study that has been completed in Omaha about development and opportunity. I know George has heard this before, and we feel like this is a great topic for the board to hear about housing affordability and the challenges and potential solutions that are out there that the Sherwood Foundation has been helping to spearhead. So I will turn it over to you, Meredith, and thank you so much for being with our board this morning.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Fantastic. Well, thanks again for the invitation to share this with you. Just to give everyone a little bit of context on where the study came from, we were interested in really answering the question, what currently exists in terms of affordable housing in our community and what might be needed over the next 20 years. Who are the players in providing affordable housing currently, and what are the funding streams? What does that look like? And then what is the gap left over, and what won't we achieve if we continue to do what we're doing? And really what was meant initially to just inform philanthropy and help us to create a strategic plan for investment ended up being something that we felt like would be also useful for a lot of our partners to hear. And we also learned that the scope of the problem is so large that it isn't something we can tackle on our own. So looking for cross-sector leadership and working together to collaborate to help address this. So I was just looking to see if I could share my screen, but I don't see that. So I can't see the presentation right now. Oh, there we go. Someone's doing it for me. I appreciate it. Okay, so can I control this? I feel a little bit like I'm not a cat right now. There we go. Okay, we can keep moving on this. Nope, we can keep moving down here. I don't know if it's possible that oh, let's see here. Okay, if you can keep the slide going, maybe I'll just raise my finger here would be helpful. If we can go to the next slide. Keep going. So one of the things I want to share with you is just really about the narrative of affordable housing and some of the work that we've heard from our partnering organizations and nonprofits over the years, as well as some of the work that we've done with MAPA is just really helping people understand how important affordable housing is and how housing touches everything. So some of the things that you'll hear, you'll all be very familiar with what this means and the investments in affordable housing and how important they are. But I think it's an important narrative for our elected officials to hear, for community partners to hear, and for just residents across the community to really understand why this is something that touches everyone. And so we see that housing is connected to economic opportunity. We see that housing is connected to education. We know that it is, we see the social determinants of health around housing and how those impact the health and wellness of not only individuals, but also the vibrancy of communities. So I think this is a great representation of how housing truly touches everything. And affordable housing is an investment in health. So children living with housing insecurity, they are more likely to be underweight, to have more visits to the ER for a number of things, but especially in terms of the health of housing. ER visits are one of the highest issues that we see in terms of housing. And children who are housing unstable also have a higher risk of family separation. In the Omaha and Council Bluffs area, and I'll share with you our study area map here shortly, but we looked at Douglas County, Sarpy County, and the city of Council Bluffs because we consider that to be more urban housing ecosystem. And so when we looked at just those areas, we saw that there are 20,000 children living in homes that are paying more than half of their income towards housing, which we know HUD defines as an extreme housing burden. Over 15% of households across the study area as a whole are paying over 50%. And 250 children last year in the state of Nebraska were actually removed from their homes because of housing instability. Affordable housing is also an investment in education. So every time a child moves, they fall at least 3 months behind in the classroom. We know this isn't only a disruption to those children, but also if we consider our teachers, the other students that are part of those classrooms, and just the social connection alone that isn't considered when we look at this data. We also know that children who experience homelessness are less likely to graduate by at least 21%. In Omaha and Council Bluffs, the areas with highest rates of eviction see that 67% of students test below average on standardized tests as compared to less than 50% at schools with lower eviction rates. And affordable housing is really a cost-effective way to prevent and address homelessness. So nationally, taxpayers would generally pay about $36,000 a year to create wraparound services and provide support for persons that are experiencing chronic homelessness. And we know that when we look at the cost to actually house those individuals, it's about 1/3. And we see those same statistics here locally. In Omaha and Council Bluffs, 3,500 people experienced homelessness for the first time in 2018. The 20% of the homeless population currently have households with children, and we spent $27 million in just 2018 on homelessness. So affordable housing also drives economic development. And nationally, for every 100 units of affordable housing, when we look at the increase in tax revenue and jobs, we see even in just the first year, $8 million in local income and 122 jobs for every 100 units of affordable housing. And again, on the other side, when we look at families and their investments, thank you, in affordable housing, those that are living in designated affordable housing are able to spend 5 times more on healthcare, 30% more on quality food, and twice as much on retirement savings. So between 2009 and 2018, again, locally, the 2,700 LIHTC units that were added to the region resulted in an economic impact of $215 million in local income, $22.4 million in tax revenue, and 3,300 jobs in the local economy. And that's just those LIHTC projects. So some high-level findings, again, that may or may not surprise you. The housing cost burden is prevalent across our region. Particularly, it impacts renters and people of color. And we saw that in a very real way during the COVID-19 crisis. I can tell you that the Sherwood Foundation alone supported rental assistance at over $10 million since last March. So as a whole, our community, as you know, from federal and state dollars, invested much more. There's a deep unmet need for quality and dedicated affordable housing. Demand for affordable housing and workforce housing is growing at a much quicker rate than we're able to produce it currently in the system in the ways that we create affordable housing. And thousands of units would lose their affordability restrictions over the next 10 to 20 years without preservation action. Some areas that are currently considered more affordable in our community are experiencing rapid rent and or home value increases, and dedicated affordable housing isn't located or produced in areas that some might say support access to opportunity. I would say they're areas that have traditionally not been invested in. And so those are areas that need more investment, but also create barriers to accessing things like jobs and education. The shortage of workforce and affordable housing creates a competition between those who are, in that especially 80 to 120% average median income range, and those who make more. We know that cash is king, and credit is also in this realm king. And so when someone has a higher credit score or is able to quickly place cash upon either a home that's up for sale or even a rental apartment, they're in competition with one another, and the person who is making over 120% AMI is often going to get that more affordable housing, even if it might be less than 30% of their income. So we're going to look at just the focus area. Our study area, again, we broke it up into 6 parts just to make it more digestible. These aren't divided by any, again, HUD kind of guideline, but we use some natural delineating markers like 72nd Street dividing East and West Omaha. So again, Douglas County, Sarpy County, and the city of Council Bluffs. Understanding what we're saying when we're saying affordability is an important part of this conversation, right? When we're talking about affordable housing. So we did use the HUD definition of 30% or less of the average median income. Well, we know that when one person walks into a room, their average median income is different than another, and so it's difficult to really gauge what that means to an individual. But when we look at we looked at as closely, as in terms of zip codes, and also got into some granular detail block by block in trying to understand who's making how much, and really what is affordable in which areas of this study and focus area. But when we look as a whole across those two counties and the city of Council Bluffs, we saw that $930 a month is really the average to rent a 2-bedroom unit that we would consider safe and quality. And that would require an $18 an hour wage just to make, again, that 30% marker or less. So most of us here know that many jobs do not start at $18 an hour. And so essentially what we are saying to an individual is that you need to work 2 jobs in order to have a safe and quality home. And or we need to take a look right on both sides of both affordability and wages. So there's a lot of work to be done to when we just look at this statistic alone. So again, when we take a look back at our study area, you'll see that normally areas that might be considered affordable in the eastern portion of Omaha in particular, so to the east of 72nd Street, we have the highest amount of increase in rental units. So 37%. Oh, I'm sorry, this slide is actually those that are paying more than 30% of their income towards housing. So this is also that same area east of 72nd Street. We see the largest number of people who are paying more than 30% in that area that would normally be considered affordable. And that's followed by Council Bluffs. This is the slide that you can see the rapid increase in home value. So that same area to the east of 72nd Street is quickly becoming a non-affordable area for most folks that might be looking to purchase a home. And then we also see the to the southwest in the study area, which is the western portion of Sarpy County, at 33% increase in home value prices. And that's between 2010 and 2017. Median rents by census tract here. You can see the shaded areas are the darker the area, the more increase you're going to see in that rental cost. But again, you'll see that southwestern portion in the western half of Sarpy County is experiencing the greatest increase between 2010 and 2017. But we're also seeing a huge increase in the Omaha area. And when we look at where affordable units are, you'll see the dots there are LIHTC projects, public housing, Section 8, and any other kind of subsidized, dedicated affordable housing. We see that although there is a mandate from HUD to not concentrate poverty and to really work towards not having all of our affordable housing in one location, we see the trend being the eastern portion of Omaha, in the north and south areas there. And this also shows us a statistic that we're going to look at a little bit later, but the number of qualifying households, when we consider, again, the 30% average median income statistic, those that are paying more than 30%, if we looked at the number of people who need subsidy, we're at almost 100,000 units that would be needed. And we currently have 19,700 units that are dedicated to affordable housing. So it tells us that we aren't producing enough, right? That gap that you see on the far left is our current gap of the number of units that are needed. And if we take into consideration the average wages and projections for jobs in our community over the next 20 years, as well as growth that's projected in our community over the next 20 years, and we match that alongside of how we are currently producing affordable housing, which is at a rate of about 300 units per year, we get to that gap of 104,000 units that are going to be needed. So even if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to have a larger gap in the next 20 years. This number also assumes that the number of units that are currently affordable would stay affordable both on the naturally occurring affordable housing side, so those units that are maybe older and not in great condition, but allows them to be affordable, and also those units that are currently part of LIHTC programs or projects. I thought this picture might be helpful for this group because it really just, again, when we break down those study areas, those 6 different areas, we can see what currently exists in terms of supply. So each one of those tiny squares represents 1,000 units of some type of housing. So we see single family detached in that lightest color. And then you'll also see the 2 to 4 unit in that darker blue. You have a 5 to 19 units, again even a shade darker, and in that darkest is our multifamily complexes that have more than 20 units in them. So again, when we look at what currently exists, especially in eastern and western Omaha, we have a lot of single family detached housing, and we see very small amounts of the 2 to 4 unit or single family attached. So again, this is a picture of what we have been building. So when we look since 2000, currently 73% of new residential construction has been single family housing. Just 2% have been buildings that have 2 to 4 units. So that missing middle conversation that we've been hearing a lot about, this data here tells us that there is a need to, again, consider how we're building and who we're building for, and make sure that those are in alignment. I think one other important part of the conversation for us is when we think about, again, this idea, excuse me, of access to opportunity. I would say, again, that's often based on, our history of investment in different parts of our community. But when we look at the Child Opportunity Index, which is a national measure of how children access educational, economic, and environmental health, we see that the areas where we do have dedicated affordable housing have the least amount of investment. They have the least amount of opportunity. And that should be a concern for all of us. Excuse me. So what types of housing are needed? Again, when we think about the 100,000 unit gap and what is going to be needed by 2040, this is a way we broke that information down. So we have the different income brackets at the top, and you'll see that those are also associated with average median incomes in that light gray below. And then the blue at the bottom, that hashed lighter blue, it signifies our current rental demand. And then that solid blue is a future demand for rental properties. And then we have the same in the for sale market that is in that darker blue. So this tells us that a majority of what will be needed in the future is going to be that workforce housing, and that for sale demand for workforce is significant. We also know that anything that is really at that 80 to 120% average median income and below requires some type of subsidy. So we have a need for different types of investment if we're going to be able to, again, address this issue that's growing rapidly. So what's the cost? What's the price tag on creating those 104,000 units? In our study area, it's $17.4 billion investment that would be needed over the next 20 years to really address that demand. $2 billion we anticipate would be rehabilitation, and $15 billion in new construction. And when we looked at this a little further, majority of the costs, we estimate about 79% would be addressed by current tools that exist in the for-profit market. We also see about 8% of the need coming in from the public sector and federal dollars that would come in. It leaves us with a 13% gap, where philanthropy or other types of tools would be necessary in order to create the capital to address this issue. That seems like a huge number unless we look at what we are currently investing. So one of the things we thought was important was to take a look at our philanthropic giving, and 9 foundations actually came to the table to fund this study. And when we took just those 9 local foundations and we looked at their investments in 2018, we saw that they gave $425 million in grants to Omaha and Council Bluffs in just 2018. When we broke that down further and we looked at the things that were invested in, that $425 million, you'll see a large portion of that was in education. We have a lot of civic and arts investments in human services, youth development, health and food initiatives, community services. So again, when we think back to that wheel of how housing touches everything, we see that these are things that housing touches. We know that these are things that the social determinants of health around housing tell us are impacted by housing. But when we took a look at what we invested specifically in housing, you'll see that $20 million in the darker blue was the investment that was made towards housing. And of that 20 million, $12 million was for a capital campaign in a shelter. So it causes us to ask the question, are we investing downstream? Are we investing in the solutions or that are from root causes, or are we really looking at band-aids? And we know that we need to start considering how we're investing and whether or not we can make more investments upstream in trying to address some of the root causes. With every year that passes, this challenge grows. So in just the 1 year it took for us to do this study, we saw that, in September that there was a stark number. It was just kind of shocking to see that 108,000 households across the state of Nebraska would have been eligible for eviction had it not been for the moratorium. And again, I think that COVID has just helped us really understand a problem we knew already existed, but we have people who are living paycheck to paycheck, and we have families that are very housing unstable. And I don't know that any of us understood how many of them across our state were really struggling until the pandemic made that apparent. Home prices have increased by $13,000 in just the last year in our study area, and rents have increased by $60 a month. So, for you and I, $60 might not be as much or a significant amount, but for a lot of families, that's the difference between having food security and not having food security. And when we took a look at the ecosystem and kind of currently what's happening, we looked at our partners in physical development, those that are making investments in people, and those who are currently focusing on policy. So we asked our partners for feedback, and we brought all these players together. We asked about what their priorities were, and what we heard from them is that they wanted to prevent and address housing instability. They want to accelerate affordable housing production. They want to preserve existing affordable housing. They want to foster innovations to lower housing costs. So again, affordability by design is an important part of this. And then to provide relief in gentrifying areas. So come up with solutions and possibly use tax law to be able to help folks who are living in areas where those home values and rents are going up significantly. I won't go into this in detail because you'll get a copy of this as well, but the priorities of these practitioners, they were really specific. They know what they want, they know what they need, and we took all of these into account when we asked our consultants to give us recommendations for how we could move forward. So we based our recommendations off of the current ecosystem and also off what the stakeholders said were the things that were most important to them. And so here are the strategies that I'll take you through each one of these today, but we have really 5 strategies moving forward that we want to create an implementation plan for. Number one, a preservation fund to preserve the existing affordable housing. And when we look further at that, again, it's to address this problem that even in the next 10 years, we are at the risk of losing 3,000 units that are dedicated and affordable. Those are LifeTech projects. And many of the naturally affordable, they're naturally occurring affordable housing are also at risk. We see a lot of investment in our urban core and in areas that really have a lot of opportunity for jobs. I love that we're seeing great projects by folks reinvesting in Midtown and downtown in Omaha, but it also, without policies to ensure that there's affordable housing, we won't see those there. And then the existing tools and subsidies aren't sufficient to support preservation at the current scale. Again, you'll see that number by 2030 that we could potentially lose. And really the idea of this fund is just to really address that capital stack challenge that we see right now when it comes to preservation. So even with a traditional bank loan and tax credits, and then the developer's own equity, we know that there's still a gap. And we're hearing this from a lot of folks that are considering reinvestment in LifeTech projects that are potentially going to expire. We hear them saying we can't make the numbers work. And that's concerning to us because we want to make sure to preserve the housing that is already affordable. So again, not only is it those expiring LifeTech projects, but those that otherwise are being converted to market rate because they don't have a HUD subsidy that they had prior, and there's just really not another mechanism to make certain that folks can stay in it. So that picture is of St. James Manor. Last March, at the very beginning of the pandemic, that was converted to market rate. And we know that there were many seniors living in those units who were qualify at 30% or lower in terms of AMI. Our current Social Security for seniors put them in the lowest bracket. And we know that there is not really capital investment that can help preserve those types of units if they lose HUD subsidies. And then the deteriorating Class C property. So I think the Colonial Hotel is a great example of a beautiful rehab project in our Blackstone area, but again, without some type of requirement for an affordable housing set aside or a percentage of affordability in our new or preservation of existing buildings or deteriorating Class C, then we aren't going to ensure that the people who are actually working in Blackstone can also live in Blackstone. So we based our preservation fund off of a precedent that is from the Detroit Housing Fund for the Future. It's a public-private partnership, and their goal is 10,000 units that are preserved and 2,000 new units. They already have 50 million committed, and they have a $75 million target. It was seeded by the Kresge Foundation at $10 million, and it offers a combination of grants and low-interest loans and preferred equity products. And it's managed by LISC, who you'll see again here. They're a national organization that really helps with these types of funds. And we've had a lot of people say loans are as low interest as they can possibly get, but it's really that balance of the grants and loans together that help make these funds work. If we were to do something like this in Omaha at an average investment of $30,000 per unit, we, with a $60 million investment, could preserve up to 2,000 units, which is 2/3 of the number of units that are expiring over the next 10 years. Development fund, very similar to the preservation fund. Again, we made the case for why we think this is necessary. We aren't keeping up with the pace, and we don't want to see households competing. And our promising precedent comes out of Charlotte, the Charlotte Housing Opportunity Fund. It's a $100 million public-private partnership seeded by the Foundation for the Carolinas. Their target is 2,000 mixed income multifamily units of housing, and it's also managed by LISC. And when we look at development potential in Omaha, I think this is a great example. This is the new BRT line that is along Dodge Street. And those dark parcels that you see there are vacant lots. And so there's a lot of area for opportunity where we can make sure that we have some dedicated affordable housing, preferably mixed income affordable housing, that we could have along these high transit routes, making sure people have access to jobs and education. Same kind of concept where we come in and we really help make up for that gap where tax credits and developer equity can't do it alone. Potential impact in Omaha, if we invested $40,000 per unit, a $50 million investment would create 1,250 units. It might not seem like a lot, but again, that's doubling the current pace of production. Right to tenant counsel. So this is an important one we've been discussing a lot in terms of even here at the state legislature. I know that there are things moving, but we find this really important because we know the impact it has, again, on individuals, children, and families. We know from folks here in our community, the Legal Aid Housing Justice Project, we're seeing that when people have right to tenant counsel, 80 to 90% of those cases are ending in some kind of resolution rather than eviction. And we all know that eviction not only impacts where you live that day and having to move from that home, but ever being able to rent again, having any opportunity to make sure you have housing stability in the future. This is a map that shows the areas of highest eviction in our community. And again, we know that those are the same areas that we are seeing the highest increase in housing costs in terms of for sale and as well as the rental costs. This is just another example of the schools that are seeing the highest eviction rates. And when we look at our precedent, the Cleveland Right to Counsel law, it established free legal counsel in eviction cases. Again, we're seeing that in a couple of places across Nebraska. We have the Tenant Assistance Project in Lancaster County. We have the Housing Justice Project here in Douglas County. And just making sure that families and individuals have legal representation is making a big impact. So this was a partnership between the city, United Way, and Legal Aid. Again, when we think about investment, $2 million could potentially help 20,000 households from being evicted. I will also say that in terms of tenant representation, we know that the opposite is true when someone doesn't have representation. So although 80 to 90% of cases are dismissed, when someone has an attorney, 80 to 90% of cases where a client doesn't have representation also end in eviction. The Homeowner Greenlining Fund, this is one of my favorites. You'll see there that's the 1933 redlining map from Omaha. And we know that for many years there was institutional racism that caused inequity. And we still see the results today when you look at the areas that we have highest unemployment rates, we have the highest quality of education, we have lack of access to environmental safety and health. Those are the same areas that we're traditionally disinvested in, and we're left out of investment. And when we think about the areas that need the most capital in terms of the appraisal gap, where the values are too low for borrowers to be able to get sufficient financing, both for preservation, but also for new construction, these are the same areas. So that's where it gets the name, the Homeowner Greenlining Fund. It's to reinvest in those formerly disinvested neighborhoods and to be able to really prevent the continuing to leave out parts of our community, in particular our non-white residents who we see that a significant difference in the number of folks who are in home ownership versus being rental properties. So this would, again, it prevents investment in affordable or for sale housing in these neighborhoods by folks that might come in and just be flipping properties or raising rents and things like that as well, because it allows people to have an option for home ownership. The precedent is the Detroit Home Mortgage Program. It's a $40 million fund for second mortgages up to $75,000 to close the appraisal gap. It can be used for the buy-in or move-in ready homes. It can be used for renovations. It can be used, again, for refinancing. This was a public-private partnership with both the Kresge and Ford Foundations at the table with that $9 million in support. And again, it's that important piece of if it costs $200,000 to build a house anywhere, but in one neighborhood it's going to appraise at $120,000, and in another neighborhood it is going to appraise at $200,000. We automatically end up with a gap in specific neighborhoods. So this is really important to address. In Omaha, in the Omaha Council Bluffs area, if we were to pilot something like this at an average second mortgage of $40,000, a $50 million investment would create 1,250 mortgages. Again, when we think about home ownership, these statistics here show you that there's a huge discrepancy between white home ownership and non-white home ownership in our area. So this is something we need to address. Policy change. So these are just a few, and you'll see something familiar to all of you on this list, but trying to address source of income discrimination. We saw this with the CARES Act funding in Douglas County and the challenges we had to overcome some of the lease agreements, which allow landlords to discriminate against any kind of income that doesn't come directly from the person on the lease. So you aren't able to receive assistance in any other way. We also want to see the LIHTC match for 4% credits. This is a really important thing we heard from developers, and the need to really think through how we can use and really leverage those federal dollars. They've become even more valuable in the recent months, and so I think this is an important goal for us as a community and as a state to really be able to utilize those dollars. Missing middle zone reform and understanding where we can create zoning changes that would allow for those 2 to 4 unit buildings, small multifamily, or any other kind of creative design. And then TIF to support affordable housing is another goal for us. I would also add to this list that, as you may know, we partner in a lot of the purpose-built community work that happens here in the Omaha area. And so really wanting to see and figure out how we can use CRANE dollars to be able to, stand up some of these projects that have so much support on both a federal level and also from local government and philanthropy. So these projects that we know are best practice and are incorporating holistic development and creating mixed income housing opportunities, which we also know to be best practice in terms of community vitality. And then precedents across the country. We see many cities that are using or have protections against source of income discrimination. We also see Oklahoma, Texas, Illinois. I would add Colorado to that state LIHTC match for 4% credits, the missing middle zone reform in Minneapolis and Tulsa, and really watching communities like Cincinnati and Chicago use TIF to support affordable housing in ways that have made a huge impact. These are, again, all the things that can come from these potential policy changes, but it, in essence, is just creating more affordable housing. So project impact, what could the combined impacts of these efforts be? these are the low hanging fruit, right? New affordable units, the preservation of units that otherwise will lose their affordability restrictions, and then home ownership and fewer evictions. Broader impacts, we see community health, we see investments in terms of tax revenue, jobs, and then improved performance in schools. But we know that these are just, again, a few of the things that happen when we create healthy, stable places for people to live. It also gives families and individuals the ability to invest back in their community. We can't be at our very best when we don't know if we're going to have a roof over our head, and we know this to be true. So I really believe that this is an important investment for all of us to come together around, and I think it's one that makes such a broad impact that we would be fools to not learn from our friends on the coast. And this is one of those times where it is fortunate that we are in the middle of America, and we have the opportunity to kind of learn and see, like, this is what has happened when communities don't plan for the affordable housing crisis, and we still have time to do this work. So the last question I'll leave you with is something as I've presented this information across the community, I really ask this question with an open mind, is what does cross-sector leadership look like in working towards addressing affordable housing needs? So I think this is important because, again, the scope of the problem can't be solved by philanthropy alone. And we really need to partner together to address this. And we have to all agree that this is a problem that's worth tackling, and because we understand how significant it is to children and families. And I gave you a ton of information, and I probably went quite a bit over time. So please let me know if you have questions. I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll end there.
Meredith, I know we do have some questions. Thank you. That
Great.
was very comprehensive. I know, Tony, you've got a couple, and I'm sure some others might as well.
Meredith, can you hear me?
I can.
Let me say this. First of all, since I've been here, that is the most comprehensive and the best housing study that I've seen. So I don't know, and even
you.
just the graphics on the PowerPoint made it very clear and understandable. George sent it to us, and I had a chance to thoroughly read it last night. So congratulations, and extremely well done. I particularly like the slides that really laid out the gaps, not just the housing gaps, but the funding gaps and the inventory. And Shannon, that would be something that would be great if we could do that for all 16 regions that I'm talking about, because then we can have a real comprehensive conversation about what it needs, and it would feel like we could measure whether we're making progress or not. That's one of the things I've struggled with, because I hadn't been able to measure whether we're making progress. So I do have a few questions and a comment.
Sure.
On the slide that speaks to the economic impact in terms of job creation, it would be helpful for me just to, at some point, maybe see a slide that could connect the dots.
Okay.
That really shows the math behind how affordable housing creates those jobs and all of those, all the other information, and also on the slide that says broader impact. Because I'd like to be able to speak more intelligently to the actual economic impact of creating affordable housing.
Okay, absolutely. I can have the consultants get the data source for you. I mean, I think one of the things we don't think about, most of us think about construction, right? But we don't think about all the other pieces. So there's somebody that's underwriting, there's the financial institutions.
Sure.
There's a lot of things that, again, just the production of this housing process it touches. And so I'll make sure to get that data source and send it to you, no problem.
Okay. Yeah, as we're talking about how it creates jobs, it'd be great, to the point that you just made, to show the verticals that the jobs are being created in. But then we have to think about the supply for those verticals, because right now we have a workforce shortage. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just want to be able to connect those dots. So I think that's number one.
You got it.
I think number two, will we have an opportunity to receive a copy of your presentation? Because there were a few slides in your presentation that weren't in the one that you sent us last night, George.
Yes, I'm happy to send that.
Okay, perfect. And then number three, I think the slides about philanthropy and subsidy in terms of closing the gaps I think that's a really great narrative. I'd like to also introduce the narrative of job creation and support for entrepreneurs, because I think philosophically the subsidies are good, but if you can create jobs in those areas so that the person can pay for the home themselves, and if you can support entrepreneurs in those areas so that those entrepreneurs can hire people, the end game is how do we create a model based on people being able to work and make money themselves, that they can close the gaps on those subsidies themselves without relying on the philanthropy. I think the philanthropy has its place and should be a starter point, but at some point, sustainability through job creation and supporting entrepreneurs, I think that's kind of important.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with you. And if it was up to me, again, that work on the increasing wages side, I think is so important. We're seeing a national conversation right now where we're struggling to get to a $15 an hour mark. And we know that for a 2-bedroom rental at $935, which I would challenge anybody to go out and find today, that would require an $18 an hour job. So there definitely has to be work on both of those sides. But I also don't want us to, I think we need to be, again, honest about where we make investments. And if we're able to provide, again, that when we think about Maslow's hierarchy, right? If we're be able to create a roof over someone's head, so that frees them up to be able to show up as their best employee, show up as the best parent that they can show up as, show up for themselves. I think that is really giving a person an opportunity that they may not need that forever after, but we can't fool ourselves into thinking that housing is affordable, and that there isn't help needed. And so even if it's making sure that the capital is available on the front side of these types of projects, that's a different story. And I'm not talking about creating necessarily subsidy for developers. I'm talking about making sure that we are incentivizing development that is affordable to everyone. Because I don't want to live in a neighborhood where I think I deserve to live there, but my barista doesn't deserve to live there, or the person that takes care of my child doesn't deserve to live next to me. And right now, that's what we're saying is okay for us if we aren't really willing to take an honest look at this problem, in my opinion. So I'm asking us to be honest about what we're building, how much it costs, and who can afford it, because we just know right now that not everybody's going to go from where they're at today to being able to earn that wage or be own their own business tomorrow. But I absolutely agree with you. I'd love to see us. This has to be sustainable, but there have always been programs in our country to help create that social safety net, and if we have those, this is an important place to make sure that there are investments in.
Thank you. Meredith, we're all in here. The last comment I make is that the Department of Economic Development just opened an office in North Omaha. We've got a person that's leading I'll use the term, the economic job creation and entrepreneur charge. And in July, we will put a housing person in that office. So
Excellent.
I'd love to partner with you, not just through NIFA, but through the governor's mission of developing North Omaha by putting that office in and helping us get a housing person that will help support these efforts.
Fantastic. It's great to hear. I've been talking with some folks that have been working on that project, and they're pretty excited about it. So good to hear.
Thank you.
Right. Warren, you look like you have a question.
I do. First of all, Meredith, I want to thank you for your presentation. I looked it over before we came. I thought it was very informative. I appreciate the work you've gone to. And I have a question, but it's more along the lines of a comment or two. And I look at it from a micro perspective rather than a macro perspective.
Sure.
And the first one I would make reference to is the call for free legal counsel for tenants. Well, that doesn't change the Nebraska Landlord Tenant Act. So the question I have is, Is that something that is more or less an indictment of NIFA when we create these organizations and these projects, that we don't put some protections in there for those folks? Or is there some other way that you think that we could address that issue?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is not that I think there should never be an eviction. I understand that there are times that there you just can't come to a resolution. My concern is that if we're seeing so if someone shows up with a lawyer, okay, an attorney, and they have an 80 to 90% chance of having a resolution with their landlord, and if someone doesn't show up with counsel, they are seeing 80 to 90% of the time that they are being evicted, then there's something not right there. It's not about, does that make sense? Like because then it's really no longer about whether or not there needs to be someone evicted. It's about being able to come up with a resolution. And I feel like, again, when we think about the long-term impacts of eviction on children, think about that statistic where for every time a child moves, they fall 3 months behind in school. So are we willing to again allow people to be evicted at the rates that we're seeing now, knowing what the impact is for their lives in the long term, without legal counsel? All I'm asking for is that we make certain that people have legal counsel available, and so that they can come to the best resolution possible. And that might mean they still have to move, you know, but I think that the difference is, oh, did I lose you here?
No, we're still here.
We still hear you.
Sorry, I lost the video there. I think that the difference is just making sure that people have representation and they have access to the information that they need. How NIFA plays a part. Oh, go ahead.
I would just say, Warren, to your point, I think I look at it as providing tenant counsel is a little bit like requiring mediation in the family law cases.
And that's kind of the concept I was headed towards. That's something we should be including in our checklist to see if there is some alternative dispute resolution with regard to tenants and the landlords in those circumstances to avoid having this issue of being in court.
It's certainly something that we could look at.
As somebody who's done a number of these evictions, I was general counsel of the Housing Authority, and we probably do more evictions than any other agency in the state. So I was the person involved in a lot of these evictions that you see in those numbers. What I can tell you is the difference is when counsel appears, the non-payment of rent. Simple question: did you or did you not pay your rent? If the answer to that question is I didn't pay my rent, doesn't matter what the circumstances behind that is for the most part for most landlords. The question also becomes is when counsel becomes involved is the dignified way to allow that individual to get out of that situation. Are you going to evict them? Are you going to send the sheriff out the next week and lock them out the premises? Or what usually ends up happening, going back to comments you had about mediation, is we have a conversation. And generally, we try to do this with or without counsel, in that we're going to give you a graceful way out of the situation so you don't have an eviction on your record. So generally, the deals that you make are we will mediate it if you get out by a certain date so your kids have time to adjust, you have time to find another situation. We know that it's causing a great disruption in your life, that there is a humane way to do it. And I think to your point, Warren, I think, you know, as we start talking about policy initiatives, I don't know if requiring mediation before you evict somebody to give them a chance to have a dignified way out, so that the problem is I did not want an individual to have an eviction on their record, because you know when they go to the next place, it makes it so much harder for them to get home. So the question is there a way that we can resolve that situation without that individual having that eviction on their record? So I think ultimately should be part of the goal that we look at. You know, is there a way that we can incentivize property owners / landlords, property managers to have a humane way to give folks a way out? There's some folks you just got to get rid of. You know, you've given opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, and at some point you just say enough is enough and you got to go. But there are some folks that you've got to figure out a way. A, I'm going to give you one chance, or B, I'm going to find a humane way out for you. And maybe that's part of the discussion we have. Is there a way that we can incentivize that as part of our process?
Well, I would mention that America's liberator always said, circumstances alter cases.
Exactly.
And in those situations where some event, and events happen, I won't
Mhm.
use the word I usually use.
Yep.
That is something that could be overcome by having an opportunity to
Exactly.
either mediate or set up a separate agreement. With regard to those folks, it might be valuable. The other thing is, what's the contemplated vacancy rate in these places anyway? I mean, there's got to be some contemplated
There is.
vacancy rate.
There is, and that's part of the balance, and that's part of the discussion that you've got to have as a landlord, because as you know, the biggest expense you have is turnover. When you turn over, not only are you losing rent, but then you got to go in and clean the unit, you got to paint it, you got to do all those things. It sits vacant, then you got to relet it. So that's part of the calculus, and that's part of the selfish part from the landlord is, if there's a circumstance that may be beyond this person's control, is there a way that I can save them and keep them in the unit? And because that way I don't have to deal with all that other expense and lost income I'm going to have for 3 or 4 months when I go through a unit turn. So I think that's part of the consideration as well.
I agree.
So
I think
Warren,
that's
I don't
something
know
we
if
should
you've read it, but the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond, it's been floating around. That's probably something that would be important for those of you on the board who haven't read to read.
Sure.
And then we can talk about things like landlord mitigation funds, which we did actually put in the budget for this year.
And I think, and I agree. I think Meredith, this is a good point, because I think there is a way that, you know, at the Housing Authority, I encouraged our residents to go to legal aid. I encouraged them to go to Create Legal before the eviction happened, because they needed to understand what their rights are. So when we start talking about policy things, I think one of those things is we can require that a form. Here's one of the things: when we sent the eviction notice to the landlord, we attached legal aid and Create Legal. Go see these folks and figure out, are we doing the right thing? Because sometimes our property managers were not doing the right things and we need to be checked. So, you know, I think there is a way to do it so that we can require that, you know, you, as part of your tenancy addendum, you give them the information for legal aid and Create Legal, so they ever have any questions, they go there to make sure that their rights are protected. And so I think those are proactive things that we can do to help our tenants, because some of our landlords, I think for the most part in the tax credit program, I can't think of a landlord that I would say is abusive or has historically bad reputation for just kicking out their tenants, at least in Omaha. We have some that don't understand their rules when they mix them with vouchers, but that's a whole nother discussion. But I think there are ways we can address that issue.
I think it's a discussion we need to include in the overall QAP program we're going to develop. The other comment I was going to make, and this isn't a question, but where I'm from in Valentine, for example, with regard to employment, there's one chain store up there that refuses to have any full-time employees. So they are not responsible for all the other benefits of employment, health insurance and all that stuff. And consequently, those folks never have an opportunity to get any of those additional considerations. And that's part of the problem we have as well. I don't know that we can change that, but I think it needs to enter into our conversation.
I would agree.
It's important.
Good deal.
I had a question.
Oh, Michael.
Yeah. Hi, thanks very much for the presentation. NIFA is doing a lot of visioning and inward looking as to our role going forward. And I'd appreciate you providing us with a page of bullets at the 50,000 foot level,
Sure.
which I think you operate in, as well as on the ground, where you see NIFA from where you operate, both high up at the macro level and then concretely down on the ground, where housing hits the street, and what you think NIFA's role is in both realms.
Sure. So I appreciate you actually bringing that up, because I realized I forgot to kind of mention our next steps in bringing it from that 50,000 foot down to the ground. But obviously, again, when it comes to things like Crane Project and consideration of investment in projects that we see have multiple partners at the table and have an element of best practice when it comes to affordable housing, which is that mixed income model, where we have neighborhood development that's going on where you can't determine who's living in a subsidized unit versus who isn't. right? So those 30, 30, and 30 especially. So those that are subsidized in two of the three components are subsidized, but everyone's housing looks the same. We know that that's best practice. And so supporting projects like that on that higher level, as well as, again, that 4% match of the federal tax credit, it really frees up the ability for our developers to make sure they're utilizing everything possible to build the best project that they can. And it really is intimidating, I think, to a lot of developers that haven't been in this world, if they don't know how to use some of those tools, being able to ensure that they're going to have things lined up. One of the other things I heard is the application process for all of these different, not only the tax credit projects, but also if they're using housing trust fund dollars and things like that in alignment with our community block grant dollars. All of those applications are timed at different places throughout the year. So unless you have really deep pockets, and we know a few of those folks that have been willing to do those projects, and they're really well done. I mean, there's a couple I can think of in Omaha because I'm most familiar, that are really well done, but they required, all of these types of incentives stacked on one another, and they were only able to do it because they're developers that have incredibly deep pockets. So they could take those financial risks. They could put more of their own equity in than most developers. So creating some type of tool that would allow these smaller and emerging developers to also have affordability incentives. I think about in Omaha, the Spark CID group. They have a developers academy, and there's a bunch of folks coming out of that academy who are excited about affordable housing, but they're still trying to learn about all these different programs and processes, and they're not, they don't have a huge staff that can go through these lengthy application processes. So thinking through how we streamline things to make this more accessible, to make building affordable housing more accessible to more people, I think is important, because they're able to do the work. They're able to provide and produce quality housing, and they're willing to do it at an affordable rate if they can figure out the incentives. And as part of the implementation process for us, we will be taking those different types of funds and even those different types of policy changes and really breaking them down to a granular level to help us understand, like, where do we need to make changes and shifts. So I promise that I will loop you in on that and probably ask for your input when we are getting especially to those policy change pieces. I've also seen where, NIFA and the things you're supporting, like Shannon just mentioned, the landlord, I can't remember the incentive. Thank you. The landlord mitigation program. I've heard from our partners at Nebraska Children and Families Foundation how much some of the other NIFA programs like that have really made an impact in more rural communities this year. So your willingness to pilot some new things like that, I think that's encouraging to a lot of folks, because it's going to take all of us being innovative and thinking outside the box in order to be able to really address the problem. If there was a silver bullet, we would have already figured it out. So I think that piloting some of these exciting programs, I think it's John in your office that has been working with Jason Feldhaus. Jason's just super excited about his partnership with NIFA, and again, the willingness to just try new things, and we don't want to villainize or vilify landlords. We want to figure out how to make this work on both sides for folks, because we understand for some of them, they're dependent on their rent, the rent from their the people in their units to be able to pay their own rent, right? So I'm really excited to see you doing some of those more innovative projects, and we'll keep you posted as we are piloting our innovative projects as well.
Yeah, thank you. And And again, I'd just like to emphasize, if you, as a board member, if you'd keep it shorter rather than longer, and, you know, a page of some bullets, and if you want to
Sure.
attach a lot of information along with that, great. But the fact is that when you send that over, we're going to rely on the staff here to do, they're the ones that are here day to day. But what's important to me as a board member is to figure out, as NIFA moves forward, just exactly what it's going to continue to do well, and also then where it's going to grow into new areas, what areas are appropriate, so that we're not stumbling over someone else who's already there and can do it better. And so from where you sit, that's why it's important. We don't see you here at our board meetings like we see other folks that are interested in boards and nails. So that's why your report was fascinating, and I'd appreciate your perspective.
Absolutely. I'm glad to provide some bullet pointed information. And again, I'll keep you in the loop as we bring this down to kind of ground level.
Super.
Thank you so much, Meredith.
I do have a question.
Mhm.
As I listen to your presentation, I listen to the questions, and I think you used a great word that I'm beginning to learn and understand a little bit more, is this ecosystem. Would it be fair to say that as we look at policy that figures out a way to incentivize collaboration between the political world, the philanthropic, the private, the social services, and the private market is something that is important? Because the problem that you just identified from the numbers that I saw are too big just for one singular entity or two single entities to deal with. So as we make policy, would it be prudent for us to look at ways to figure out how to tie all those things together, at least to incentivize a way to tie all those things together to make the dollars stretch further?
Absolutely. Collaboration and the more players at the table, the better. Because again, just like you said, it's not one person that can do this. It's not one sector. And for our next step, we'll start in April. We're gathering a group. It'll be about 30 individuals that we're taking through a facilitation process of, again, taking the recommendations, those 5 areas that we're focused on, those 5 strategies, and we're going to break that down into, okay, what does that look like? What does it look like from funding? What does it look like in like who's leading this? Who's waking up every day and this is their work? What does this look like when the rubber hits the road? So we'll be in that process with partners at the table that are philanthropic, that are for-profit, that are nonprofit, and that are government entities, and bringing us together to say, yeah, one thing I continue to hear from philanthropy is that they don't want to do this alone. They want to do public-private partnership. And so we're going to work really hard to make sure that that happens.
Can I ask that you consider adding us to that group?
I would, yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Thank you.
You got it. You're on the list, Shannon. You
Awesome.
ready?
Right.
All right.
Good deal, good deal. Any other questions, comments, clarifications before we move on? All right, well, listen, Meredith, again, thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you for your comprehensive report. This is an important topic, critical topic. And now, team, we will move on to the board workshop.
Thank you again for having me. Just to let you all know, I will send a link to to Shannon, and she can share with you. We'll have funny enough, this isn't the full report. There's so much more information, so it'll be available on the Omaha Community Foundation website in early March, and I'll send you the link. Thank you again for having me today.
Thank you. We'll take a quick 5-minute bio break, and then we'll come back and begin the workshop.
So before we get started, I just wanted to introduce one of our newest employees, Pamela Otto. Pam, wave. We were lucky to get Pam. She was probably one of the best employees who just slipped right on in because she knows exactly what we do, because we got her from DHHS, but she's been at DED and has worked with Sarah in the past. So welcome, Pam, and thanks for coming over to NIFA.
All right. So I want to make sure that we craft our time here. I know Steve has a meeting at 11:30 and I've got a meeting at 12:15. Steve and I have this job kind of called state government, and things happen across the street in the Capitol during session that cause us to have to participate in. So with that being, I know, right? Right, Herb, I know. Listen, if you guys want to come testify for these bills, Steve and I will gladly allow you to take our place. I promise you that. Really excited here to start having this discussion about our QAP policy. I want to make sure that we frame the discussion around what we need to accomplish today. And as a board, we've been waiting for this process for quite some time. And I really want to say this, Shannon, I want to commend you and your team because I've seen more progress around this process really since the time you've been here than almost in the entire time that I've been chair of the board. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just, it is what it is. We know our board is structured to represent different interests across the state, and we certainly have different viewpoints. Today, our goal is to come away with clear direction based on consensus to hand off to Shannon's staff so that they can take next steps in this process. And we want to really emphasize the policy, and Shannon's going to talk about this, but I think we got to be really focused here because this is not something that's going to happen overnight. So today is not the day for us to direct specific tactics. That's not what we're here for today. Not direct tactics or to draft a QAP application. That's not what today is for. Today is to be strategic and extremely thoughtful so that we are aligned around direction and policy. So with that being the case, I'm going to turn the attention to the workshop objectives handout, which Shannon will go over in more detail. I appreciate everybody's time today. I believe this is going to be a very valuable for NIFA in our efforts to close the gaps. I'm going to use that word often, to close the gaps around affordable housing. And then the goal today is to adjourn at noon. Okay, Shannon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So as Tony just mentioned, today what we're trying to do is to get a clear policy strategic direction. And when you give that to us, the staff will go back and we will start sifting through proposed tactics. We will start talking to the public. We'll come back with proposed tactics next. But the important policy discussion today is what do we want to accomplish with our tax credit projects? What is our goal? Just to talk today, we have some objectives for the policy discussion today. I think everybody's got it. The first is today is 30,000 feet. So we're not, as Tony said, drafting the application today. We want to identify the objectives of the board, and then what I think we'll be spending the most time on is prioritizing those objectives, because we can say, here are the policies that we have, and if we don't say which one's the most important, we end up having no policy, because if they're all equally important, none of them are important, right? We're not then moving in a direction. So that's kind of where we're starting. So I'd like at the beginning to talk a little bit, and the reason that I was really hopeful that we would get Meredith to talk to us today is because what she talked about can really help us as we talk about our policy objectives. You know, what do we want to accomplish from a healthy community standpoint? From, you know, we in the visioning process, we talked a little bit about, you know, are we, you know, housing, but our mandate around community development. And what her presentation sort of brought home to me is that, and we know this, but housing is community development, right? Housing is something that touches and is so important in all aspects of people's lives. So as we are thinking about what we want to achieve with our low-income housing tax credit projects, you know, look at it in that frame. But what are those things that we feel like we want to achieve with it? And I'm just going to open up the floor and let's start this discussion. We've got a board over there, and I'll write stuff down when we start having ideas. And as we start talking about things, somebody will throw out something and I will challenge you. I would say, is that a tactic or is that a strategy, right? And if it's a tactic, what is the tactic meant to achieve? What's the policy that tactic's meant to achieve? And let's talk about that policy, okay? Because I know it's hard to not intermix those two things, but we're going to try hard not to. So I'm throwing this open.
I'll go first.
Awesome.
And I don't know if this is a tactic or a policy, but I will tell you, my primary focus is going to be on those tenants with children. Children are the ones that have their collateral damage and have no input, no access, no opportunities, but by virtue of their parent. So I want to focus on them. I want to focus and allow them to have the confidence that in any circumstance, they're going to be able to remain there as long as possible. They're not all going to be able to. I understand that, but children, I think, need to be our focus initially. And I want them to have confidence that along with that, they're going to have safe. There's a variety of things. We know that. And these are all going to be tactics, but it's going to be safety. It's going to be education opportunities. It's going to be, well, how many two-parent households do we have where both of them work? So we're going to have some opportunity for daycare and for transportation to school and those kind of things. And I hate to see them suffer any collateral damage by virtue of the fact that there are some other issues that the parent may be providing. So we need to focus on that and determine at what point do we have to step in or what point do we have to have more rules.
No, and I would agree with that. And I think, and I wrote that long ass memo. Oops, we're in public record. I wrote that long memo a couple years ago. And I think one of the areas that has always been front and center for me is the housing opportunity aspect as a policy, because as you can see in the presentation and other things that I've read, zip code housing is often a life determinative factor. And as Sherwood Foundation kind of reinforced is that right now the housing that we have is not in areas of high opportunity. So those children, through no fault of their own, are being raised in communities where they don't have access to opportunity, their parents don't have access to opportunity. And I understand the reasons why, from a federal perspective, that housing initially ended up where it's ended up, but it doesn't mirror the economic and opportunity realities, especially in our urban centers. That's what I know best. I know Warren and some of the other folks have a little bit more experience. I'm assuming it's probably the same types of issues, that you've got to make sure that the housing that we build should be tied into opportunity, number one. How will we measure that? I think that's a policy decision. We would hope that staff would come back to us with some factors that we should take a look at in that regard. So I think opportunity, number one, is important. The second part of that is, as part of the opportunity is, I think as they indicated in that presentation, is putting our housing in areas where, I think Tony raised the issue, but entrepreneurship, where job opportunity, economic development, that those two are corollaries to the opportunity index. So I think for me, and I agree with you, I think housing that provides opportunity for parents and children, I think is a goal, should be a major goal of our Light Tech program. And right now across the country, we're facing that issue. And I think we're no different here.
So I'd like to piggyback off of that. And I came today wanting to say pretty much the same thing as George and Warren. I want the NIFA staff to look into the Moving to Opportunity HUD program, if you haven't already. I was study done through the 90s showing that if a family, excuse me, with kids moved from a high poverty neighborhood to a low poverty neighborhood, kids 13 and under did much, much better on the long term. Interestingly though, kids older than 13 did worse than their peers who stayed in the high poverty neighborhoods. I think that's an important consideration. Children are the future, and there should be a strategic focus on helping kids, helping future families, taking that long-term view.
I've been in other organizations, and one of the things that focus on when we're trying to change things. And this is pretty common, I believe, but you have to start at the lowest level with the youngest people to educate them, to train them, to give them opportunity to have any success long-term. That's my point.
And I think what Colton is doing is borne out by Meredith and Sherwood. They're involved in that 75 North project. And one of the things that they've done is they've gotten into an agreement with OPS, where they're essentially taking over one of those schools and kind of making it a, I'm not saying a charter school, but I can't remember the word that they're using, because I think what the studies have shown that if we don't figure out a way to get to kids before the age of 10, then after that age, it gets much more difficult to put them on a right educational track. So I think what you're saying is backed up by, kind of what they're trying to do with that project.
Right.
And that, I think, brings us back to a focus again, and that's partnerships.
Yeah, I would agree on the partnership piece of this. I mean, who else is in our focus area of housing development? How much overlap is there? Because the biggest issue in my mind is the big problem and the lack, there's not enough resources to address it all, right? So how do we, as NIFA, help coordinate and work with others in the focus area to be efficient and effective in the resources that we all have? How do we combine those, or how do we not make sure there's not overlap, and again, use it effectively and efficiently as possible to address the issue? And then I guess the other thing, just to throw out here, in the past, we've talked about rural versus urban in Nebraska. To me, it has to be more specific than that. Two areas, it just doesn't relate effectively in my mind to what the issues really are. So Tony has some ideas there, I know, but I think we need to break this down to more segments of the state of Nebraska, because each segment will have different priorities and probably drive a different response that we can use to be helpful.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
So, of course, right now we've got the urban-rural split, and we've got the split. Essentially, it's Omaha, Lancaster, Sarpy, and Dodge, if I remember correctly. Is there another one that's in the urban?
Metro versus non-metro, it's then Dakota, South Sioux City area.
So we're doing Metro versus
MSAs.
MSA. Okay. So are you thinking that within the rural, there's different subgrades just within that as well? Or are you thinking overall?
I think there's different subgrades within the urban
Exactly.
also, right?
Exactly.
There is. I mean,
Urban, suburban.
and then there's different segments in rural. Broken Bow's different than Stanton or,
Sure.
Valentine, Galen's Ranch and
Yep.
whatever.
No.
But so I think even within, and whatever the terminology is, whatever terminology we want to use, even within urban, there is different segments within there and different priorities, just like there is in the urban or the rural portion of the state.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it reflected in the memo that George produced and I signed off on a couple of years ago, which is we need to be able to not shotgun approach these, but rather laser or rifle approach them. And I think that would give us that opportunity, Steve.
Yeah, I think we need to be more rifle or specific oriented. The other thing, to me, when you have resources, I mean, there's some things that are maybe easier to fix and you can put some resources into it and you can see a more rapid response. But then there's some bigger underlying issues that takes more time.
Mm-hmm.
So when you utilize and decide where your resources are going to go, maybe you split your resources out and you put a certain percentage of those resources towards the easier, more responsive type of projects. And then you commit another percentage to the longer term response. That way you're not putting at least in my thought, you're not putting all of your resources into something that's going to take years and years to really see any response or results from.
Okay, I'm going to say that's a tactic, but it's a good tactic. That would be.
Well, it falls under the effectiveness and efficient use of your resources, right?
And I think as we're talking, this is maybe a tactic, but it's also a policy. When we start talking about children, families, and opportunity, I think we've got to start looking at how we delineate these supportive services. Because I think clearly providing more incentive to provide supportive services that provide economic and personal growth, in my opinion, are more important, depending on the type of housing. Because I know the senior housing is a different animal as opposed to the multifamily housing. So, as I look at our supportive services, they're all, this 2, 1 point, whatever, amenities are the same way. I think Warren has talked about, and Warren's son wrote this great piece on the broadband. I think we have to be a part of that fight to figure out a way to bring broadband to the rural as well as to some of our urban core where broadband is not available. So I know that's a tactic maybe, Shannon, but I think it falls into part of the strategy of providing housing that is providing high opportunity and economic growth. So I would like to us look at our supportive services and look at our amenities to make sure that we're incentivizing those that provide the highest degree of economic growth as well as personal growth.
George, I'm going to piggyback on 2 words that you just mentioned, and one is growth and one is broadband. So I'll take us up to the state's vision, and this is published everywhere. Steve and I have to regurgitate it all the time. It's called Grow Nebraska. And those of us that are business leaders, that if you're not growing, then you're dying. So let me share a few things about our state right now. One of our challenges, you can't cut your way or reallocate your way to profitability. You have to grow your way to profitability. And this state, from a population standpoint, has not grown much over the last 50 years. We're not even over 2 million people, but we have this large this large land mass, which everybody's trying to pay taxes, so you can't spread it out if you're not growing. There are 2 inhibitors of growth that we have here. One, George, you mentioned, is broadband, and the other one is lack of housing. We don't have the housing. Those are inhibitors. Those are things that are somewhat inhibiting our growth. So if we go up to a strategic level and we think about growth, the question I would ask is, why is growth good for us? And how does growth help to close the gaps on what is happening in our economy? So, part of what we do is we talk about the resiliency of the Nebraska economy, the lowest unemployment rate. The real issue here is not an employment issue, it's a skills gap issue. However, that growth and that stability is not the same across the entire state. As a matter of fact, in a good number of our communities, we're actually shrinking. We're not growing, we're going in the opposite direction, which is why we can't gain any traction. So I would say, from a policy standpoint, we need to think about, are we going to be a pro-growth operation when it comes to NIFA to help close some of these gaps? Because not every community is a pro-growth community. I can tell you that now. At a macro level, there are some communities that are focused on growth and focused on closing the gaps around growth. And there are others that they're very difficult to work with, Warren, because they're not focused on growth. And if we are going to be pro-growth, then we can, Steve, to your point, Nebraska, this state has a lot of micro economies. There's so much variability. A shotgun approach will not work. You can never gain any traction if you take a shotgun approach. So to your point, George, with broadband, one of the things that we did, we divided the state up into 16 regions, and we had Mike Flood work with us. We had about 45 people that worked, and we grouped those 16 regions based on similarities from an economic standpoint. And once we grouped them in those 16 regions, then we said, okay, so from a broadband standpoint, which regions have the greatest need? So there were certain regions that were not only underserved, but they were unserved. So the funding of that $40 million from the CARES Act went to the unserved and the underserved first. So my question would be is, to everybody's point, how do we use the same similar targeted approach to closing gaps and looking at the areas that are not only not growing, but they are shrinking, and find ways to close those gaps? In some situations, from a housing standpoint, Steve and I just talked about it, is that the individuals in that community don't have the money. In other situations that I see out going west, it's not that they don't have the money, they don't have the houses. Those are two very different issues. If they had the houses, then they could pay for them. In some areas in Omaha, North Omaha, not only do they not have the houses, but they don't have the money.
I would comment on that. And I think that it's my opinion that those areas that are shrinking don't have the leadership they need.
You're 100% right.
That's where it's coming from.
And I think that has to be brought into the conversation because, listen, we've chosen the path that will allow us to show early wins. And we have intentionally, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but when we look at those 16 regions, we prioritize those 16 regions based on the leadership one. Because there's some communities, they just make it very difficult to work with. Their mayors, their city councils are not aligned. And so we can't go, we only have a limited amount of time and resources, like Steve said. So you can't spend your time in a community when the leadership doesn't want you.
Sort of round that into bang for the buck. Right?
Absolutely.
What we're trying to do is to get the biggest bang for the buck, because to Steve's point, we don't have enough bucks
We don't.
to do everything. So we need to prioritize what we do have in a way that gives us the best outcome.
Correct.
And Shannon, to that note, just so everyone's aware that unless there's a, legislative change, there will be a reduction in 2022 to the amount of tax credits that each state receives. It'll go down. There was an increase in 2017 where it went up, it sunset. So it went up 12.5%, but it sunsets and is done in 2000. The last year is 2021. So we'll see about a $652,000 reduction.
Is that a congressional issue?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so we probably need to engage a delegation and see. I know there's several LIHTC bills pending right now
Yes.
at the federal level. I think one of them, if I remember correctly, will address that issue. And I don't know what if we've had any, because I know Congressman Bacon is fully aware of what's going on in this arena, because we've tried to keep him engaged somewhat, and his staff in this area. So I don't know if NIFA, I'm willing to go down and help continue to have that conversation to make sure that he supports this, because for a state like Nebraska, we cannot afford a reduction in our LIHTC number. We just can't. We need more, not less.
That's right. And that's why I thought this was a perfect opportunity to bring it up.
Okay.
I think it's something that maybe that's easily forgotten, that's sunsetting. So
Sure.
Just to put it on everybody's radar that when you're individually talking about the tax credit program, that it is something that, as you mentioned, there are a lot of things in the works.
There is.
And CSHA is doing
Yep.
a lot. But as we look at our demand, that's obviously a concern that I have on my radar going forward.
And it makes this conversation even more important, going back to the targeted approach. If you're going to reduce it, we got to figure out how to target it even more. That we get the bigger bang for the buck, as Shannon has indicated.
So yeah. Oh, sure. Maybe. I feel like I'm gonna do karaoke right now.
You want a specific song? Is there any request from the public?
Well, if I had a little moment to think about that. Okay, so when I was writing notes as Tony was talking, growth focus was a note. Prioritizing need and evaluating what is needed in different areas was a note. And then partnering with good leadership was a note. Does anybody have anything in opposition to that, or they think those aren't things that we should be looking at, just some additional comments around that? Or are these all things that we want to see in the overall priority statements?
Well, I think when you're talking about partnership with leadership, I think we got to go back to what we ended the conversation with Meredith about is philanthropic partnerships, private partnerships. I'm missing one. Public, our cities, our counties, our villages. I think they've all got to figure out a way to have a skin in the game. So, I mean, when you get a combination of that group, I think you got a pretty effective project. So I think, incentivizing or awarding projects that can tie all those together, I think it would be important as part of the growth strategy.
That's exactly the words out of my mouth, because what I see, and I'm sure we all see it, is you have a lot of entities working on the same thing.
Yep.
And there is redundancy, there's waste in cost, and there's waste in energy. And if NIFA could act as the body to help collaborate and pull all of those different entities together. I mean, my question would be, if we took an inventory on every organization that was working on affordable housing across the state, what would that list look like?
I think
I hear a new one every day.
That's right.
I'm saying, well, what are you doing with affordable housing? Well, this is what we're doing. And there's a ton of wasted energy. So Steve,
Yeah,
you're right.
I think that's a great, it's hard to move forward if you don't know exactly where you're at to start with here and who's all in the game and who's likely friends and partners that you can work with. Back to some of the other previous discussion there. So, and maybe from when I'm thinking of our strategic planning and whether this is where we're really going or not, but it seemed like NIFA as a facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
So if we really want to be a facilitator in this, I think that's a bigger picture vision, that we can be a facilitator for housing development in Nebraska. And that would drive us towards finding all these partners and working with them and cutting back on the redundancy.
But Shannon, another part of that is, which I pinged you about, there are now financial institutions, banks that want to get involved in supporting affordable housing. Leslie Anderson, who is the majority shareholder of Bank of Bennington, they have a bank in Bennington, Lincoln, and Ashland. Her bank, as a matter of policy, they want to start to create an entity to help support affordable housing. And I know a lot of banks that want to do that now.
There are even now some hedge funds that are specializing in
That's right.
affordable housing.
That's right.
Citibank has a huge one.
Herb,
I certainly agree with these comments, but I'm not certain they address our mission here, which is the QAP for awarding tax credits to tax credit developers. And I think they need to be one of our strategic partners, in your words,
You're right.
because that's what really I see our mission is here on this page. What is the qualified allocation plan for low-income housing tax credits? We're really not addressing that directly right now. We're talking about much more broadly defined possibilities that I certainly agree with, but I'm not sure they're responsive to our immediate mission.
Herb, how would you, from a policy perspective, are there certain types of developers or philosophies of developers that you think should be highlighted, rewarded, encouraged?
That aren't tax credit developers?
No, not necessarily. I mean, but when we're talking, if you're saying we partner with tax credit developers, is there something that you say we want to partner with tax credit developers that? Is there that? Or is it just we want to partner with tax credit developers, or we want to develop more tax credit developers?
A number, which one is it on the list here of 10 items? Special needs. We've partnered over the years with veterans projects offering special services to the disabled. Warren's comment about children is especially appropriate. That's a special need. I think focusing on those is certainly what we need to be doing.
Okay.
I do want to share just a little bit of information with you I think you may find interesting. D.R. Horton is the nation's largest home builder. They're coming to Omaha. They're buying ground right now, platting 55-foot wide lots for new construction houses that will start at $230,000. No options. The house is the house. If you want to buy the house, buy the house. Because we're a production builder. Now, I did a little work while our earlier speaker was talking. If you have a $230,000 mortgage, in other words, 100% financing, $550 a month taxes, $100 a month insurance, you need $1,620 for your house payment. If that's 28% of some number, that some number for round numbers is $70,000. That's the income of the household to qualify for that loan. Two $35,000 wage earners at $16.82 can afford a brand new home coming in Omaha, Nebraska. By some definitions, that's affordable. Not for the people we're talking about generally, but in the marketplace, that's very affordable. I'm not suggesting they need to partner with us. I'm just saying there are other options coming in the marketplace that address some of these needs. I think our limited resource, as scarce it is, and maybe even getting scarcer, George, needs to be husbanded very closely with what you've been after for years, a QAP that addresses the priorities as we determine them. Yep. But they're pretty well outlined in these 10 points. And I think if we were to focus on those and prioritize those, we would be marching along the road, George, I sense you want us to go, which is to have a QAP that addresses the needs of the public of the publics that we serve.
Of the state that we serve. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I said of the state that we serve. Yeah, you're right. And I would agree with that.
Great point, Herb. Thank you.
So, George, did you have a comment about the 10?
Which are we talking about, the 10 federally mandated areas? Because the way I look at it, those 10 areas are what the federal statute indicates that we have to have as a minimum or a baseline in our QAP. And I think we do that minimum, those 10 areas. I think what we're talking about is up and above beyond those 10 areas. What are we going to pursue beyond those 10? Because I think we're required to address those 10 areas, and I'm assuming whatever QAP is brought before us by staff is going to address those 10 areas, make sure that those 10 areas, I hate to say check the box for those 10 areas, because I think that's what the minimum requirements force you to do. But the question is what I would call them enhanced requirements above those 10 areas is kind of the way I look at the conversation. Because I think we're required to have those 10 areas covered.
And to address your point a little further, George, I'm not sure, Patty, that these are in any priority order.
No, they are not.
So we could prioritize them, George, according to our priorities.
Right.
And then we can have sub aspects or sub areas within each of these. For example, this one about housing needs characteristics.
Yep.
You could have a number of sub points under that with.
So example, the choice name, the opportunity index, that's a sub part of that. You're right. So that is a sub part of housing needs would be that opportunity index would be how we can potentially address that issue.
Right.
So I think
these
that-
are just minimum standards that
Right.
the code requires, and you could certainly embellish or add to the requirements as
And rearrange them in our particular order of priorities as they affect our state.
So should we, I mean, I know we're at 11 now. I know some people have to leave by 11:15. Can we talk about prioritizing the things that we've said were important? So we've got this list that we have to do. We've talked about some other things. Some of these things are tactics on the required list, but you can bring them up into the other portion. So if what we've got, what I see, we've got child wellness, we've got create and promote opportunity, we've got partnership creation, support geographies specifically, be efficient, in other words, biggest bang for the buck. Which also I think goes to growth focus, and the partnering kind of goes back. So of the things here, because these things seem to be more explanatory of these things, what of these things is the most important?
Of those things or these things?
Of these things?
Well, for me, it's going to be the child wellness, that long-term view.
I'm going to incorporate the areas of high opportunity, and I think child wellness to me is a subset of that. So that areas of high opportunity or areas of whatever term we want to use, because I've seen interchangeable terms. They use children opportunity index, whatever it is, but I think that to me should be a priority.
George, help me out by defining what you mean when you say areas of high opportunity.
There are different ways to define it. I mean, you have the hub zone definition. In the memo, I raised some areas that we and Warren and I talked about, as well as Dan when he was here. And I'm not saying these are the only ones, but every state is free to delineate them however they want them. Some states use the poverty index of a certain area. Some states use access to schools, hospitals, amenities, employment. So in my opinion, those are the things that I would rely on, Shannon and her staff to come back and tell us, we want areas of high opportunity, and we believe that looking at our state and our populations, these are the characteristics that we think would be well served in a Nebraska or a NIFA high opportunity index in the QAP. So there is no quote unquote gold standard definition. Each state is kind of allowed to come up with their own definitions as a baseline, but the goal should be to have housing that creates a community around the family that gives them an opportunity at personal and economic growth. That's the best way I can summarize it for me.
And I would say to piggyback off that, just throw this out for staff when they're considering it. There might be a different consideration, like a different list of opportunities, whether it's metro or non-metro, right?
Yep.
I think having a separation there would definitely make sense, especially talking about the broadband access.
I want to ask a question. During our strategic planning, Herb brought up equity building for families through housing. Is that something, I mean, to me, that fits in with child wellness and that what you're all talking about, but is that a bigger picture that we're helping? There's equity built some way or capital built for the families involved?
So that, our Crown program is one of those that can, with LIHTC, help with that because it allows people to, be in a rental unit, have some amount every month of their rent go toward that down payment and then be able to purchase the property after 15 years. So that is something that can fit in. And you could say one of the priorities that we have is to create home ownership, to create homeowners and help them build wealth. That could certainly be a policy priority, which would then, result in us taking a different look at how we put points or incentivize, down the road, that Crown program. And we do tons of the homeownership stuff right now, as Herb will tell you, with our mortgage program. Okay, so the question I have is, so we've got, Colton has said child wellness, child welfare. George has said child welfare in the context of high opportunity. Does anybody else want to speak to what we think should be our number one priority?
To me, it's bang for the buck. I mean, how do we be most effective with what we have?
What does that mean?
Yeah. how are we defining bang for the buck?
Well, I think that's part of the work that we have to do here. I mean, we talked about the collaboration
Yep.
and that part of it.
So basically extending our dollars or is it a financial metric or is it a
Social metric.
social metric? Yeah, thank you. I was trying to figure out what the word was.
Well, I
Because
mean,
we've been-
obviously,
let
it's
me
always in the
interrupt.
details, right, of how you want to explain something.
We've been doing the financial metric in our QAP for years.
Yep.
Price per bedroom, price per unit, all those sort of things where we throw out the high and the low and we
Yep.
get the median and the standard deviations and all of that. I don't think we've been responsive at the social metric level in trying to put a bang to the buck concept in place.
You've hit my problem with our QRP dead on the head. Our QRP was so focused on economic drivers that we lost focus of policy or social determinatives or just drivers.
And
Well-
of course, one reason probably is that those social metrics are quite subjective
Yep.
and intangible
Yep.
and hard to compare
Yep.
and hard to measure, obviously.
Well, they are and they aren't. I mean, I think, that's where we have to determine what are the measures, if you say at the beginning, we put a project in and we had this many people in this community with this level of income. And if we're successful, we say that at the end of or at a certain period of time, what will we want to have accomplished? We would have wanted to make sure that people are not only in housing that is less than 30% of their average median income, but that they also have, stable houses for the kids, that they have, there are things that you can measure. It's just, we have to determine what is it we're measuring. And that's been the problem, is what is it that we're measuring?
So you're suggesting that all of the social criteria have objective standards?
I think some of them have objective standards. You can look at income, you can look at number of jobs, you can look at grades of kids, you can look at graduation rates. There are savings. Do people have 401ks? Or there are things you can look at. We just have to determine what it is that we want to look at, and then how to get that data. Not saying it's easy.
Some states in terms of looking at this will put, for instance, they'll have certain standards for preservation versus certain standards for new construction. And they are willing to put more money into the preservation, which sometimes is more expensive, I think, than doing new construction, depending on where you're located. So you look at the bang for the buck, but then you say, but what are we trying to achieve? And if you're trying to preserve housing, then maybe you spend a little more. If there's more housing that you need to just get out of the ground, then you put more toward new construction.
And Patty, that's brought up an excellent thing that I think we've talked about in recent years is it's the board's policy to focus, incentivize preservation or new construction of units. That's something that we hear again and again and again. So I was hoping that would be brought up, because that's something that we hear a lot.
And it doesn't mean you can't focus on both. It's a question of how do you allocate your resources for those different areas. I do have one quick question, and probably more so for Tony. And when you talk about, the state focusing on, we don't have enough housing and we need broadband. Is broadband, and I know in over years, the QAP will have points for having Wi-Fi in the units and things like that. But is broadband an issue that really is too big for NIFA? How much of an impact will NIFA have if they put things in the QAP versus this has got to be solved by the state and the communities in terms of broadband? I mean, I know there are a number of legislative bills. I don't pretend to know what the real solution is, but I don't know if, I guess that would be my question. Is that an area where for bang for the buck, you're not going to have enough bang on the broadband versus?
What I would say is, I think, Patty, I think you're right, but I think we got to just work in concert with all of the initiatives that are focused on broadband. And, Shannon, to your point, and Herb, and also George, I think it's got to be I think with anything, it's got to be a balanced approach. I mean, if you only focus on ROI specific to the financials, I mean, what the data and what history shows is that you miss out on a real outcome. So I think in these communities as it pertains to the QAP, we got to start with the consumer in mind. So who's the customer?
Yep.
And that customer could be the, the builder and the person that's going to live in the home. And then how do we put together a balance? I'm going to use the term a balanced scorecard that we can use as our guide specific to measuring success with these QAPs.
I would agree with that. And I think the definition of who is our client, the client is the community, in my opinion. And then speaking as a developer, I'm speaking against my own interest in certain aspects because while I'm a partner, I'm going to build what you prioritize. Because I want to, at the end of the day, I want that developer fee. That's what motivates a lot of us in this business is we want that developer fee at the end of the day. So the question is, what are you going to incentivize me to build? So if you're just going to go focus on the dollar at the end of the day, there's a reason why a large bulk of our housing is in areas where there's no opportunity. Land is cheap, it's easy to build, and the neighbors aren't squawking. But no one cares that there's no schools, there's no hospitals, there's no access to transportation, yada yada. So we've not had a balanced approach in that regard, and that's reflected in our map. And so is there a way that we can, like Tony says, balance those two? And I hate, I don't want to disagree with you, Herb. We should listen to the development community, but they should not be the driver. We're the driver, focusing on what's best for the communities that we serve. Because as a developer, I'm going to continue to beg you, please, please make it easy for me to go buy the cheapest piece of dirt, build the thing, and be gone. Get my developer fee, run it for 15 years, come back to Robin and Sarah, 15 years up. I want to re-up again. And we have not had any social benefit out of that project in terms of other than maybe housing a family, which we've done, which is important. Let's not say I'm not minimizing that. We've housed families, but have we done enough to make sure that we're giving those families an opportunity to better their lives? I think that's the ultimate question. That's why the consumer should be the focus of this discussion, figure out a balanced approach as as a banker, essentially that's what we are, and also as a policy maker. And that's the difficult question. There's going to be winners and losers, and we're going to have to make difficult policy decisions one way or another.
Yeah, I would, if I may make a comment, I appreciate everybody's comments, and Herb always seems to be able to cut to the chase, which is very helpful.
He does.
Which is why we're glad he's here.
But I'm looking at 58202, Nebraska Investment Finance Authority. And as I scan through that, it seems to have one common thread throughout each of those areas, and that is economic development. Yep. I think that needs to be maybe our rule and guide to begin with.
So I think a missing piece here that we haven't talked about, but we have talked about in previous meetings, is the missing middle.
Yep.
If we focus entirely on bang for the buck, we're going to end up with new developments in cheap parts of towns that are large complexes, kind of cookie cuttered, right?
What?
Cookie cutter, big complexes on cheap ground, right? That's what we're going to get if we only worry about bang for the buck. That totally gets rid of anything in the middle, which we keep coming back to, but we haven't addressed.
Can I ask a question about the middle? Sorry.
Yeah.
Could I ask a question about the middle? Because I think it would be good for us to understand the full scope of the different NIFA programs. Because we clearly have the LIHTC program, which is more focused on affordable, and I hate the word low income, but affordable. I wish we could just call it the affordable housing program, but that's not my call. But the affordable piece, and then I know we've got this workforce housing segment that you guys also work on, and then there's the home ownership piece. So so the question is, how do all those three, we have all three programs, correct? So when we're talking about this missing middle, is that the workforce housing program that you guys, because that's what the 80% and above, because right now we focus on 60% and below in this program, correct?
Right, yes.
Okay.
I would say for the low-income housing tax credit program, you're basically looking at 60% AMI or less. Now,
That's
with
by federal law.
income
That's by
averaging-
federal law, not our
yeah,
choice.
with income averaging projects can choose to go up to 80 as long
Got
as they're averaging 60. We have, that's just a very new thing, so we have very few projects that are doing that yet. But yes, the workforce housing can go up to 150% of AMI is what you as a board defined as workforce housing. So I think that fits more in the missing middle. Yeah.
And so what is the board's role in the workforce housing piece?
It's helping us to approve programs to do workforce housing. So you've set what those limits are. Jackie and the homeownership team right now is working on some workforce housing loan products. And so we'll be trying to roll out some stuff like that. We're talking with the Nebraska Bankers Association to, ensure that we're meeting a need for that. But then also the board's role is to help us figure out what exactly needs to be done in the workforce housing area. Like what are you seeing as gaps? And then when we bring things to you like the LB 866, we're planning to bring an LB 866 match opportunity to you as a board so that we can help build workforce housing in Lincoln and Omaha. And so approving that sort of thing would be helpful. Yeah, Herb.
I just want to clarify a definition. In real estate development parlance and in the parlance of the new urbanism, the missing middle is a product type that exists between single family homes and high rises. So it would start with duplexes, threeplexes, fourplexes, row houses, accessory dwelling units, low rise, like a 12plex. It's that missing middle product type between a single family home and a high rise. And I just want to offer that as a way to avoid any potential confusion about what we're talking about.
Thank you for that clarification, Herb. The layering on top of that is that often workforce housing people live in missing middle, but missing middle is a product type. Pat.
I was just going to mention the NIFA statute, in addition to the economic development focus, also says that when it comes to housing, your focus is low and moderate income individuals and families. And the board, from a policy standpoint, with respect to, for instance, the workforce housing, has said, okay, we think moderate income is up to 150% of area median income. For the single family program, the income limits are defined by federal law. And so you're stuck with 100% of area median income for families of 1 or 2, or 110% for 3 or more. And as George mentioned, on the tax credit program, it's restricted even further, other than the whole project. And again, I'm not a developer of tax credit projects, but other than you are permitted to use the restrictions only apply under the code for up to a certain amount of the units, 20% of the units at 50% of AMI or 40% at 60, plus then the income averaging. And in recent times, most of the projects are 100%. No, they're not. We do have some market.
We've really seen in the last couple of years a push to go more towards some of the units as market, whether it's 10, 20%, if they can make a project work.
And I
to
think
be able to
that's-
add those market units.
And I'm glad you brought that up because Colton, that's another way we talk about the missing middle or this other, the gap folk. Incentivizing more or and larger mixed income developments where we can mix our moderate to low income folks with quote unquote market rate folks who may be in that missing middle. That might be another way to maybe address that issue outside of the workforce housing statute, because the way our QAP is set up, you get points if you develop based, I think, was it 5, 10, and 20? I can't remember what the numbers are off the top of my head, but you get points for number of percentage of mixed income housing units that you have in your development. And I think incentivizing up and above what we incentivize now might be part of helping address that missing middle as we build some of this housing.
That's exactly right. That would be a key way to start addressing more the missing middle. And I will mention, because it was mentioned, I think, by the presenter, that NIFA has always been on top of making sure that when there are market units and tax credit units, that they are of the same quality and conditions. And it may surprise you that there are some that are in the business of developing affordable housing that would argue that they shouldn't be. And so we still have that educational piece to remind people that they need to look alike.
Yeah, and I think, that would be spelled out on our QAP, that you can't differentiate. If you're gonna build something for market rate, you better well build it for the affordable, and vice versa.
And we have that, that's actually in our LURA.
Yep.
Because we strongly believe you don't create a have and a have not within the same development because one person's paying higher rent than the other one is.
Well, and again, to what Herb was mentioning, the missing middle is, I don't know off the top of my head, but we do have a large number of projects that are duplex and triplex. I mean, there's a pretty large number, at least in the recent years. I can only speak for so long. Robin's been here a lot longer, but we do see a lot of that, maybe a little bit more in more rural areas than urban areas, but that's really, you've made my brain start whirling there, and I'm gonna have to actually get those numbers and look at those a little closer, because that's an interesting way to look at things.
So I have a question along lines here. So the funds that NIFA has available, and that we offer for the tax credits, can we drive those in a way that results in more construction? Right? I mean, that's how do we, back to the bang for the buck thing, or if we incentivize projects, can one builder utilize the same amount of tax credit some way and get a bigger project built than another builder? I mean, are there ways that we can utilize our funds that would help these builders get more projects out of the same amount of dollars?
So I think, I'll defer to Robin on this, but what I think you're asking is if we, for instance, incentivized layering more project partners, public-private philanthropy into a project so they needed less tax credits, can we make the tax credits go further and get more things built?
Yeah, or the same amount of tax credits, but you get a bigger project out of it. However you want to look at it, I guess, right?
Robin?
Well, I think that was the intent behind the efficient housing production measurements. That was really the intent, and that's why we would compare them against each other, and we didn't set some random number that said, if you're below this amount per unit, you get X points, which some states do. So I think that was the effort behind those measurements, which were right now are costs per unit, cost per square footage, and then tax credits per occupant, which some may argue that tax credit figure is maybe one of the most important ones, because that's really what, is based on how much you're giving to a project.
So if the number of houses or homes isn't our goal, if it's location or social aspects of it, then we change those metrics that you're talking about.
Well,
Somewhat.
maybe. I mean, but that is part of the reason that the Crane program exists too, because some of the types of projects that have those tons of layering of funds and a lot of services wrapped around the individuals make those numbers skew. So that is part of the reason, and you can speak to that because I wasn't here then, but it's part of the whole goal behind the Crane program, that is more driving some of the social aspect, or focuses more on the social aspect, or has in the past, than just the underlying comparison of cost.
And I think, while I love the Crane program, that's my problem with the Crane program. Housing that should be priority, that should score well in competitive, based on policy initiatives, have to put themselves into Crane. While Crane is good, the problem with Crane is time. And time, as you know, in our world is money. And, if I've got that Centerpoint project that was up here, that Lincoln Centerpoint project, I don't know, remember we approved that for Crane? That's a project because of supportive services, has a goal of ending or assisting, the homeless youth or mental health? Mental health. Those are things that affect the community. So we're building housing to help folks that have mental health issues. We're getting them off the street. We're giving them supportive services. But so since those things don't have a high enough priority in our competitive round, as a developer, if I want to take the time and I'm community oriented enough, I'll throw it into Crane and wind myself through that process. While in my opinion, that's the type of project where you talk about social alternatives, getting people off the street, getting them the mental health services, getting them support. I should score well competitive. I would be jumping up and down as a board to say, hey, we funded that project in the competitive round. And so as a developer, I know I've got a good shot of going in, getting it done. And I don't have to go through the Crane process, which can be a 6 to a year process, 6 months to a year process before I get funded. So
The other side to that that's important to remember is your bang for your buck comment. If we do that, we will get, I mean, because that was an expensive project and asked for quite a bit of credit. We may only get 5 projects, and that was 32 units. So we may get significantly less units. Now, again, that's not my decision. That's your as a board. But again, with you bringing up the bang for the buck thing, it's that balance of that's a great project. There's many great projects, but balancing that social and then the bang for the buck piece.
And I think, and I agree with that. And I think there is a way, and I guess that's why we're going through this exercise is we've got to find a way to balance those two. Because I think right now we're skewed toward just develop, regardless of this other social alternatives. The Crane project is the only one, in my opinion, that places emphasis on dealing with those social determinative factors that we want to address. Opportunity, mental health, homelessness. I agree, but I think right now we're skewed one way as trying to find that balance. So I would agree with you.
Just one comment before I have to take off here, but I say, let's fix the Crane project program then, right? Some way, whatever, I don't know if that's something we have any real say in, but let's change the process and make, if time is the issue with Crane, let's figure out a way to make it a shorter time frame.
Get us more credit. No, I'm kidding. If it were only that simple, right?
Yeah, I mean, part of
The
the,
other piece to Crane though too, is that, I mean, a lot of those projects, they do need that extra time because they're putting together multiple resources. And so sometimes, they move along at their own pace through there, and sometimes the timing is just, we don't have enough credits, so they have to wait. If they are ready, they have to wait until we have more credits in that process. So, but a lot of times the time that it takes is good for a project because they may need that because there's a lot of moving parts in that project that are not like a traditional rental project.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But I think as a developer, for example, the veterans housing projects I built went through Crane. I tried to put them in competitive, never score well, but I'm ready to go. I got a project. I've got funding from the VA. I've got funding from HUD. I've got funding from NIFA, but I got to sit around and wait for credits. And so you got homeless veterans sitting on the streets because I'm waiting for credits. We opened that building. We were full within 2 weeks. 60 units, veterans, boom, done.
so
But
I'm
I think
gonna,
How do you make a pro forma work over that time period with all of your costs rising? I don't get how you make that possible.
You talk about sitting through the process.
Well, the time it takes
Yeah, no, trust me.
means all of your costs are rising. How do you do a pro forma at the beginning to see if it's even feasible?
You try to build that some of that into your pro forma and hope that you're right by the time you get the award. Or B, if something really, really, really funky happens, you go to Shannon and you beg for that extra 10% that she's got to give you and you can justify it. So basically that's part of the reason, at least from our perspective, when we put our numbers together for the Crane, we'll probably put a little bit more for that unexpected inflation and escalation than we normally would. So that causes it to be a little bit more of an expensive project.
Doesn't that cause your numbers in the approval process to drop?
Well,
you don't have that in Crane.
we use the numbers from the most recent competitive round to limit the amount of credits to make sure we're still having some controls in there.
That's what I mean.
But there are a little bit more flexibilities, and then they also have automatically get a boost, which then affects the credit amount they can request.
So I'm going to just try to bring this around to, from the discussion that we've had here, what's more important, more units or units that address the social outcomes that we're trying to get to? Which of those two things is more important? I'm going to do a raise of hands. Who thinks that more units is the more important thing? Okay, we've got a half a vote for more units. Okay, who thinks units designed to achieve the social outcomes is more important? Okay, all right, that is a clear policy choice.
As long as the social outcome includes targeted areas across the state, right?
Yeah. Okay, and so that's the other thing. So the social outcomes are most important, but social outcomes that address the needs of specific geographic areas. Okay, so if we got nothing else out of today, we got social outcomes that address specific needs in our geographic areas across the state. Are we at least happy with that one policy statement?
Well, I might contend that it's a false choice, that more units is a social outcome
Well, that's true, Herb.
because
And-
it's helping more people. It
And
is.
to Herb's point, I mean, and this is just kind of my thought around it. I think somehow, and Shannon, I think maybe this is the work that your team does, is we got to find a balance. I think there's a real balance. And I've seen this on a number of other boards that I'm sitting on right now, because if you only lead with a financial metric, then you're going to create an unintended consequence. And if you only lead with a consumer metric, then you're going to create a financial unintended consequence. So I think that the work that we would love to see from your team is come back with some kind of draft of a balance. And I'll be pretty adamant about this. You got to start with the consumer in mind. Now, however you define the consumer, is the consumer a segment of our population? Is the consumer a community? But what I can adamantly tell you when I was appointed to this job, and the governor said, look at North Omaha, there's been a lot of philanthropic money that has been put into North Omaha. I mean, you're talking multiple millions of dollars, but somehow whoever was doing it didn't start with the consumer. And so the return on all those philanthropic dollars, I'm not saying there's not a return, but there's no way we would be in that neighborhood would be in the same condition it is right now if it would run more like I'll use the term a balanced business.
So I would be interested in having the board help us, and we'll bring some stuff back to you, but create our own ROI metrics for projects so that we can start, implementing and then saying, this is what we expect to happen as a result of this project, and then be able to measure it over 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years and see whether what we hoped would happen happened. And if not, look at tweaking what we're doing.
Shannon, if I could just make a quick comment. I'm not wanting to speak because I haven't spoken yet, but I really shouldn't be here. The profit potential of a dead calf is very low. And I got a hell of a dirty look from my son when I left this morning, I assure you of that. But I came down here to learn. The QAP is foreign to me. It's never affected me. And that's the main reason I'm down here. And I see two observations as I sit here listening. First of all, Steve brought it up. I think we need to consolidate all the different entities that are involved, be it in affordable housing or whatever. Little old Fullerton, Nebraska, 1,400 population. We have a Chamber of Commerce and we have a Fullerton Area Economic Development Committee. I have no idea why in the hell we have two of them. I'm going to both meetings just to observe. One of these days, I'm going to pop the balloon and then hurt some feelings, but I think it's ridiculous. And I just commented that there's so many overlying entities involved in whatever term you want to use in regards to the housing. The other thing is, and I've been involved in a lot of different organizations and government entities and everything, one size does not fit all. this urban, rural, I mean, there's a difference between Valentine and Fullerton and Lexington, Nebraska and Cushing, Nebraska. Robin's the only one who knows where Cushing's at. But I think those are the things we need to remember. And I'm glad I came. If I get home and we've got a not good situation, won't be the first time I've had my butt chewed. And the main, and I shouldn't say main, but one of the really important reasons I came is I wanted to make sure Herb was still in the human flesh. I'm tired of seeing. And I really appreciate his presence because his wit and wisdom comes out when he's here on the damn Zoom. He's gone half the time. Done.
People on Zoom can't even talk. Can't ask questions, can't make motions or second motions or vote. So being on Zoom is like being in the ozone.
Right, we've missed having you vote and talk. So thank
Say
you for
again?
coming. We've missed having you vote and talk. So thank you for being here
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
We appreciate it. Okay, so right now where we are is we have one specific policy, which is that we are looking at trying to create something that's balanced, but that really takes into account the social outcomes and the different geographic needs of our areas instead of having a one-size-fits-all solution. Okay, do we feel like, is there anything else that you want the staff to know as we go back for this next phase? What else do you want us to know?
This item 5 on this 10-point list, tenant populations with special housing needs.
Yes,
To the extent that we prioritize children, we would have to de-emphasize perhaps veterans, the disabled, the elderly, that some of our monies have gone to historically. Patty, in the law, is there any requirement for a certain percentage to each of these different, I'll call them constituencies? Yeah, in other words, can we play around with the distribution of our money?
You can, and you have in the course of the QAPs over the years. For instance, there have been points awarded for senior housing that
Right.
were not available for other housing. There are points that are awarded for housing for families. And there are different points that are awarded for special needs. So you have done exactly what you're suggesting, is that your staff has looked at the different categories and listened to the developers and the public and others in the focus group meetings to prioritize by assigning how many points per different characteristic.
Well, I'd like to see, as a matter of interest, what our current and previous QAP has produced by way of the distribution of our tax credits among these various constituencies. I agree with one. Kids have got to be maybe elevated in the priority. Maybe we've been allocating too much to constituencies without children. And there are several of those that I just mentioned. So I'd kind of like to see some kind of an allocation of our LIHTC awards
That's a great point.
by constituency.
we will create that report for
If
you.
you do that, break it up between Crane and competitive.
Okay,
I'm sorry,
Because
George?
break it up between Crane and competitive. Your competitive list is going to look significantly different from your Crane list. So if I would, when you do that exercise, break it up between the two programs.
And the
You
most,
know,
We make our priority children, we might need to shift the points.
No, I agree. I think that's the decision. That's what we got to make. You know, and I think it's a hierarchy. Number one is going to be children, I'm assuming, or something to this economic indicator policy thing. You know, I think still homelessness, I think is a priority. I think we can't lose sight of that because I think we talk about getting people off the street should be a priority. I'm assuming that still will remain some priority within the hierarchy. Because right now I don't see it as a priority in our QAP.
And one.
Sure.
Can I ask a question about how you would like to see that? Because if you think back to when we bring recommendations to you, we do show a pie chart that says if it's senior, if it's targeted to seniors, or special needs, or eventual homeownership, or just, we call it just straight out family. If it's not targeting one of those other things,
Yeah.
we just call them family units. So is there more detail you would like to see beyond that, like as far as like bedroom sizes, or is there a certain span of years you would like to see? That would be my other.
I think for this exercise, as Herb has indicated, I think that's the type,
Okay.
and then I think show that whether it's crane or competitive, that's what I want to analyze, because what you'll see is a trend of supportive housing programs go to crane, and our traditional multifamily usually go to the competitive side. And
Well-
senior housing, to a certain extent, and senior housing.
And it might be helpful either in the presentation or when bringing it back to discuss with the board to talk about a little bit about the different projects. Because for instance, the Sienna Francis House.
Yep.
I mean, that's families, that's eventual home ownership, that's
Homeless.
homelessness,
Yeah.
that's everything. 75 North, which was a bond program, that was focused on not just low and moderate income, but also it was so combined with various resources targeted at jobs, targeted at children, targeted at education. You know, they really worked closely, as George said, with
75 North
OPS.
is the perfect example of that.
Mhm.
So
what?
But it's.
What we're talking about right here, these things here, because they addressed mixed income, they had low income, they had
Seniors.
senior, they had mixed use, because they had this innovation hub for entrepreneurs. They had the coffee shop, they had job training, seniors,
Education.
education, but we still made it difficult for them to go through the competitive process.
Well,
That's a project that should have scored well, in my opinion.
it was a bond project.
It's a bond
Yeah,
project, but
so
they
it
had a
didn't-
project go through competitive. That never, I don't, did it ever get an award?
Talking about the senior part?
Nobility Point or?
The senior went through
It came
competitive,
through,
right?
It came through.
Yeah, that went through competitive.
No,
They-
it
they
No,
went
had-
through crane.
it went through crane
Crane.
Crane.
because it could not score in competitive.
They had
Well-
several and have several different
Yep.
projects that
Yep.
come.
But when
that
you look at
comprise.
a project that we should support, it's in North Omaha, it's got all these things. Those guys should have been seriously competitive in a competitive round. Based on,
I think-
based on policy.
I think, I think George is right. I think we got to look at it holistically. I think we got to take a balanced approach. I think we got to challenge the current paradigm. What I would also challenge us to do is I get back to growth. And what I would tell you is the largest inhibitor of growth in this state right now, specifically, and I'm not saying all the other things, senior homes, not, the largest inhibitor of growth in our community right now is workforce housing. Like even when we go to negotiate, I'll just take Spacecom, for example.
Yep.
I mean, of the metrics that we were scored for the Spacecom deal, which Alabama won, Nebraska was number 2, workforce housing was the area that they were most concerned about in DC, because if they had all these military personnel, and you're in the military, you don't make a lot of money. You just don't. So what I would challenge us to do is, as we're going through this prioritization process, that to George's point, we look at it holistically, because you have to look at it holistically when you're really thinking about a gap. We identify the customer and the consumer first. We look at it holistically. And then when we think about the return, we think about, from an economic development standpoint, how is it going to benefit the state from a growth standpoint in totality? And workforce, I can tell you, workforce housing is creating the largest issue for us as we go to try to sell this state. So again, I'm not saying homelessness is not important. I'm not saying seniors not important. I'm just sharing with you all, when we try to sell this state, the two things that always come up, and I think that's where the kids are important. Do you have the workforce, and do you have the housing? So if we don't take care of these kids, because another statistic which we shouldn't be proud of is we have a large percentage of kids in this state that are below the poverty line. I mean, here in Lincoln, you know, Shannon, we were on Prosper Lincoln. Yeah, 50% of the kids just in Lincoln that are on free and reduced lunch. So when you keep these kids, when the kids don't have an opportunity to get above that poverty line, then you're hurting your long-term pipeline.
We actually have one school here in Lincoln that has 97% of the student population at free and reduced lunch.
97?
97% in one school.
So if the presentation that we saw earlier today says that housing impacts those kids in this way, if to the point that we made, if we make kids a part of it, then we start improving that pipeline. And if we improve that pipeline, then that's going to help us with that workforce vertical. Again, two things that make it very difficult for us to sell the state, other than mountains and oceans. I can get over that. Workforce and affordable housing.
And I think that's where the philanthropic community is key, is on the workforce housing, because so many of the programs that are available through NIFA or other entities are targeted to low and moderate income, and you're not going to get to some of those workforce levels. And that was what I think was one of the benefits for 75 North, is they had an infusion of capital from a philanthropic institution, so they were able to do a portion of the project as a true market rate project. They don't look at income in terms of level, you know, keeping income at some level. And it was open to basically anyone who wanted to live there.
And I think that goes back to the we are facilitators. We
Absolutely.
need to partner with people all across the state to make a bigger pie.
That's right, because there are things that just statutorily NIFA is restricted, where the philanthropic dollars can do a little bit more.
Exactly. So I'm going to turn it back over to Tony and just say thank you all for the time that you spent today. I thought it was valuable. I think as staff, we really understand more where you want to go and what you think is important. And we will take this information and do some reports and look at some things to be able to come back for our next round on the QAP. So thank you all very much.
Well, listen, this was a great discussion, and I will tell you, I want to commend every board member sitting around the table right now and the NIFA staff for us to have gotten to the point where we are today and still get to adjourn at noon. I've seen this take all day. So this lends itself to the efficiency of the teammates that we have in the room right now. Shannon, I hope you all have some good takeaways to do some work, and we'll come back as a board and we'll help to pull it together. And I think we're all going to be very satisfied with the new narrative that we're going to create, and it will give everyone that is involved in helping to grow the state another tool in our toolbox as we go out and try to sell Nebraska. So to that point, Shannon, do you want to go ahead and do your announcements and upcoming events, and then we'll get ready to adjourn?
I don't actually have any announcements and upcoming events, so that's pretty short. Yeah,
Okay.
the only announcement is that, you know, we are thrilled to have Colton back. We are thrilled to have Herb back.
Back in the flush.
Yep. So welcome back, Herb.
That's right. I want to make a comment before you seek a motion to adjourn, and it's going to be brief, and it's going to be basically, I appreciate everything the staff has done. I appreciate everybody that I get to sit with on this board. I really like being around smart people, and it's made my job easy. You are close to her.
No, I'll second that. And I will say that, you know, as Tony has indicated, this is a discussion that I think I've been wanting to have for a long time. And I think everybody on this board has been wanting to have this discussion for a long time. I think the guidance, the professionalism that the staff has exhibited is exceptional. And I think, yeah, at the end of the day, I think we'll have a product that we can be proud of.
Any other comments, clarifications?
Well, a question.
Yes, sir.
Who was watching us on Zoom today? Not by name, obviously, but are there people watching us on Zoom that can contribute to this process?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Who was on Zoom?
I was gonna say, I'm sure there were, and we will begin the process of having some focus groups with the public in addition to the work that we're doing with you so that we can
Good.
gather their feedback and bring that back to you as well.
That's great.
I guess one comment before we go, or a question. Talking about a comprehensive report for the state, kind of like what Meredith did for Omaha. Do you have a timeline on that? Any projections, any efforts going on?
So we don't have anything going on specifically right now, although we are starting. We're kind of we're nascent at the beginning of this. As I mentioned, I think at the last meeting, LB 446, which I'll be testifying at tomorrow on Tuesday, does actually create a mandate for us to provide statewide housing information in order to help guide cities, developers, and legislators in making housing policy. So that's something that will be a very large focus for us going forward.
Great. Does that allocate funds to that process as well, or
I'm sorry, what?
would that allocate a state budget
No.
for us?
No, unfortunately,
Okay.
it's,
We'll just do it then.
it's just a NIFA, you go do that. But because I feel like that's really part of our mission anyway, and we do have the dashboard and we do have some resources to allocate to it. And I think that's a huge return on our investment to be able to help people make better decisions.
And I think the other thing, Cole, that's really helped me is NIFA funds some of these housing studies. They hire market study groups and they fund some of these housing studies. We've got a project that we're doing in Sarpy County, workforce housing. And the impetus for that was the NIFA's study for affordable housing in Sarpy County. So I think it would be nice to maybe get a list of some of those studies that have been done. Just a quick perusal through those will kind of give you a flavor for what's going on in some of the communities around the state in terms of the affordable housing needs of those communities. And NIFA does a pretty good job with those studies. Hannah Keelan does most of those, is that right?
They do many.
Yeah.
But there's several.
Just several. As you can tell, I'm a junkie. So sometimes I'll just sit through and I'll just shuffle through them and get big picture ideas, kind of what's going on in Schuyler, Sarpy County, and some of those other places. I think it's a great resource. It really is.
So
Well, I think it's a great thing for us to invest in.
Yep.
I just like when other people give us
I will
money to
send,
do it.
well, and just in a little moment of synchronicity, Elizabeth Fimbres just sent out yesterday to the staff a comprehensive list of the housing studies that we've done over the years. And I said, I'm going to send that to the board. So you'll get that later this afternoon.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, or clarifications? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Do we need to vote on the adjournment? All right. Everybody stay warm. We got a heat wave coming, I think, anyway.
We do.
Look, I didn't even wear a